first question is just on the spending. It looks like $2 billion per year in additional spending. You've also blown a significant hole in your income in terms of the PST cut. You also say you're going to get back to balanced budgets, and I'm wondering if this sets us up for a repeat of what happened in the early 2000s when there were significant cuts to social services to pay for tax cuts that your government brought in back then. So how do you see getting back to balanced budgets with this plan?
Well, first of all, in response to the idea that there will be cuts in government spending in the next few years under a Liberal government, the answer is no. When I go for my bike ride in the morning, I go through a park near my house, and there are always 2 or 3 BC-plated motorhomes there, old ones. These are people who run out of money. We need to get them back on their feet, and it's not the time to start cutting social services. It's time to reach out to people and say, you're in trouble, and government needs to have a hand in giving you some help. So in terms of how this gets sorted out, this is a much more serious situation than the 2001 recession. This is more like a wartime scenario. We have to borrow money at very low interest rates to get BC building again, to make sure that BC is prospering again. And that's how we'll grow our way out of this recession and how we'll pay that debt back. And my goal, my personal goal, is to say within 5 years of receiving a vaccine, we need to have a balanced budget in British Columbia once again. We have to have a plan to get back to positive balances in government. We can't run deficits forever, but in the next couple of years, we will certainly be running deficits just like every other government in the Western world.
Do you have a follow-up, Justine?
I do. Just back to you said you apologized 2 days ago for those remarks that were made at the Liberal fundraiser, which took place more than 3 weeks ago now. I'm wondering, at what point did you become embarrassed and felt that you owed Ms. Ma an apology?
Well, the embarrassment occurred during the event. Many people who were at Ralph Sultan's retirement roast thought Jane's remarks were in exceptionally bad taste and showed poor judgment. I'm included in that. I was embarrassed to see those remarks being made. That's not the way my world works in terms of relationships with very capable women, especially women who've taken the time to get elected to the legislature. So the embarrassment was immediate, and it was felt throughout the audience for that call. And since then, of course, this has come to light in a more public forum, which made it a more public issue. That's why I issued an apology 2 days ago, a sincere apology to Bowen Ma. And I've asked Jane Thornthwaite if Bowen sees fit to contact Jane to extend the invitation that I'd be happy to talk to Bowen if she sees fit. But that decision rests with Bowen.
Thanks. We'll move on to the next question. Richard Zassman, Global News. Go ahead, Richard.
To that point you were just making, Andrew, why not at the time stop it or say something that you were embarrassed in the midst of all of this unfolding?
Well, I think we've all been in those scenarios where someone's saying something inappropriate. It may be at a family event, it may be at a wedding, it may be at a retirement roast. This one was for an 87-year-old gentleman who lives alone, and there was that sense of not wanting to ruin his evening, but at the same time being somewhat taken aback at what was coming out of Jane's mouth. And so as the remarks proceeded, many of us were increasingly embarrassed to the point of being appalled. But it's hard to stop the train in a social event when you don't know what the next words will be. So it's something that's very regrettable. It's something that I'm embarrassed by. I wish I had found a way to intervene at the time without embarrassing Ralph Sultan and the other people on the call. But what's done is done, and we have to make amends, and that's why I apologized 2 days ago, and that's why I'm, through Jane, extending the offer to speak with Bowen Ma if she sees fit.
Do you have a follow-up, Richard?
I do. So there are a few polls out today. Ipsos has done one from Global, Leger for the Vancouver Sun. They show pretty similar numbers in terms of wide gaps between the NDP and the Liberals. Why do you think you are so unpopular amongst British Columbians?
Well, it's been said many times that the only poll that counts is on election day, and we have 87 different elections going on. And my job is to put forward a solid plan for British Columbians, and they'll hear more about that at the debate tonight. Because this has been an election where There's been less opportunity to meet and engage with people. There's less opportunity to get information out. And the debate should be a very good way of getting this information out and setting up the difference between John Horgan, who's shown himself to be not worthy of the public trust, and our solid plan for building a future for British Columbia. That's my job. That's what I've taken on. And tonight will be a great opportunity to do so.
Great. Thank you. Next question, we will go to Vaughn Palmer from the Vancouver Sun. Go ahead, Vaughn.
Good day, Mr. Wilkinson. We have another report out today raising the alarm bells on the situation at Site C and what it's going to cost to fix the problem. Shouldn't British Columbians be told at least the preliminary estimate for what it's going to cost to fix the problem there, how long it's going to take, and even whether it can be fixed?
This is a very valid point, because you'll recall that Site C was handed over to the NDP on time and on budget. They went through a review process with the BC Utilities Commission and decided that they would proceed with it. And then we found out in, I believe it was July of this year, that they'd had problems and concerns since January and hadn't told anybody, and that their oversight committee was somehow not good enough, so they were going to appoint Mr. Peter Milburn to oversee the oversight committee. And the point you make is that this is all getting a bit silly. Let's get the facts on the table, and let's get the engineering opinions about what it's going to take to fix the problem, because this was handed over on time and on budget, and somehow the NDP have managed to turn it into a scary project in terms of the cost.
Do you have a follow-up, Vaughn?
Yes, please. You've told us several times, Mr. Wilkinson, that you have family members who are gay and lesbian. Have you asked them how they feel about candidates running for office, one of whom opposed a rainbow crosswalk, and the other of whom has put money into a publication that promotes conversion therapy?
We have conversations in my family on a regular basis, and they're very healthy and positive. And we talk about the role of politics in reconciling different opinions and bringing people together on a common cause. And my common cause is that every British Columbian can live completely free of discrimination, and certainly people who are LGBTQ+ must be able to live their life free of discrimination, especially when they're my own family members. So it's a topic of conversation, and it's understood in my family that there's work to be done, and we are doing that work and proud to do it.
Great, thank you. We'll go to the next question. Shannon Patterson from CTV News. Go ahead, Shannon.
Oh, hi. Going back to the issue about the roast, you said you were embarrassed at the time. You said others were embarrassed at the time. So did you speak to Jane about it immediately after the roast occurred? Did you have a conversation with her? Did you tell her it was inappropriate? Or did that only happen after the video came out and the public saw it?
Well, her performance and choice of words was so inappropriate that it was abundantly clear by the end of the roast that she'd made a bit of a fool of herself. They were hurtful words, they were sexist and inappropriate, and I thought the event spoke for itself. At the same time, during the event, we didn't want to disturb Ralph Sultan's 87th birthday retirement party, and so the issue got dealt with more recently, and that's why I've apologized 2 days ago directly to Bowen Ma and suggested that Jane, when she speaks with Bowen, offer that I'd be more than happy to talk with Bowen about this event because it was totally inappropriate and inexcusable.
Do you have a follow-up, Shannon?
So just to be clear, between the time the event occurred and the video became public on the weekend, nobody from your office or yourself spoke to Jane and told her it was wrong?
Well, Jane's performance that night was so clearly inappropriate and embarrassing that the tenor of the call was that she had done something completely wrong. And so I didn't reinforce it that night because she knew that abundantly herself. It didn't need to be reinforced because it was so clear that what she did was wrong. I was embarrassed by it, and perhaps in retrospect I should have spoken with her about never doing that again, but I would think that she learned that lesson on the spot because the event was an embarrassment for Ralph, it was an embarrassment for the people in the call, and she was clearly embarrassed herself at her own performance.
Great, thanks. We're moving on to the next question. Les Lane from the Times Colonist. Go ahead, Les.
Oh, thanks. You mentioned several times the timing of this election and how inappropriate it is and potentially dangerous health-wise. That has been in play for the initial weeks of this campaign, and I think a fair number of people agree with the premise that this election is unnecessary and ill-timed. But that has gotten zero traction that I can see. The issue's over. Most people agree this election is unnecessary, but the issue's faded. People seem to have shrugged and moved on. Well, what do you make of that?
Les, my information is actually quite the opposite. Checking in with candidates recently, yesterday in fact, there's a widespread sense of anger on the doorstep when our candidates go and very carefully knock on the door and back off with masks on and ask people how they're feeling and what their issues are. A good percentage of those people at the doorstep say this is a totally unnecessary election. What on earth was John Horgan thinking? We've got much bigger things to be worried about than trying to keep his career going. And why didn't he just carry on for another year? So I think your personal contact base is different from what we're hearing on the doorstep.
Do you have a follow-up, Les?
Are you seeing any polls that reflect that distaste? I agree with what you've said, but it doesn't seem to be resonating in terms of voter preference at this point.
Well, my recollection is in the early days of this election, the polls were asking that question. I think it was 58% of British Columbians thought it was totally inappropriate to have an election now. But I believe that question has faded out of the pollsters' interest as they focus on other issues more recently.
Great. Thanks, Les. We have time for 2 more questions. Next question will be Mary Griffin from Check News. Go ahead, Mary.
Oh, hi. Thanks very much. I'm just wondering, Mr. Wilkinson, that you did post an apology on Twitter, and I understand that Jane Braithwaite phoned and left a message for Bowen Ma, but my understanding is nobody has really made an effort to get in touch with her, and you're saying today that if she wants to reach out to you, is it not incumbent upon yourself and others involved in that Zoom call to continually outreach to Bowen Ma?
You're correct, and I confirmed half an hour ago that Jane Thornthwaite has left voicemail messages with Bowen Ma, and it's obviously up to Bowen Ma whether she wants to be back in touch with Jane. And I've asked Jane on my behalf to extend to Bowen, if and when they speak, the option of Bowen and I having a conversation where I can express my disappointment in the whole process, my disappointment in Jane, my disappointment in myself, and say that we're sorry once again.
Do you have a follow-up, Mary?
I do. Just shifting gears a little bit and going to the election, I've been on the street talking with people who say they are upset about the election call as well as Les was saying, but they have greater concerns that they would like to see continuity of government during this pandemic. How do you address that? They feel the most important issue right now is getting this through this pandemic with the government that has set out the policy at the outset.
Well, having been in government as a civil servant myself, I know that continuity does occur. Dr. Henry is still working for the government of British Columbia. We hired her, and she will continue to work for the government of British Columbia. About 200,000 people work in our healthcare system, and they're continuing to work every day. And the issue becomes, why do we have a 3-month gap in new programs? It's because John Horgan called an election. And if you're a tourism operator and sitting around the kitchen table this weekend with your spouse, the conversation will have included, should we just pack it in? We're just losing money hand over fist, and why are we doing this? John Horgan should have been out there with the assistance of the Greens, providing that continuity of government programming to develop programs to help those people. Instead, he's off on a career-protecting program that serves only his interests. So new government programs are stalled, existing programs carry on, and our goal is to get better new programs in place, like $10 a day daycare, like dropping the PST to 0 for a year to give people a chance to get ahead, like abolishing small business income tax, and making sure that British Columbians have the confidence to move into the future and rebuild BC.
Great, thanks. We have time for one last question. Rob Buffum, CTV News, Vancouver Island. Go ahead, Rob.
Oh, hi, good morning. I guess my first question is, you are, as we've discussed, well behind in the polls, and then this weekend, this controversy emerges. What do you have to do to turn this thing around to have a chance of winning, and do you have enough time with less than 2 weeks to go?
Well, I think it's well known that voters come to their conclusions once they've got enough information. And the goal is to get the information out there as soon as possible. We've already announced the abolition of sales tax for a year and reduction to 3% for the year after. We've already announced the very affordable daycare program and a massive infrastructure program. We've already announced the seniors care program. So this will find its way into the thinking of voters. They will come to their own conclusions, and our job is to persuade them we've got a better pathway. And I'm confident of that. We get a very, very strong response on the doorstep when we go through these things, and it's a very promising prospect for us. We've got excellent candidates in 87 ridings, and there'll be 87 elections on September 24th and in the advance polls where people will make their own conclusions about these things.
Do you have a follow-up, Rob?
I do. In looking at the platform, as I read it, pretty much all those items have been already announced. I'm wondering if you can identify something that is new other than some details that may have been fleshed out for various items. But what's new in this morning's platform that hasn't already been announced this campaign?
Two things you will have noticed. One is the announcement of building and fitting out 10,000 daycare spaces. That is new because we have to have the physical facilities as well as having a more affordable program, because demand will increase as more people get into the workforce by being able to take their kids to daycare. And the second thing you will have noticed is a strong commitment to environmental issues. It's in two sections. One is climate change, and the other one is talking about protecting our landscape, making sure that our salmon and steelhead don't disappear in our lifetimes, which would be a tragedy. We've got to protect those iconic species. Increasing campground spaces so people can enjoy parks. Improving the campground reservation system, which does not work for British Columbians. And making sure that people have that sense of the pleasure of living in British Columbia. It's not good enough to be at home saying we can't get out in the parks, we can't get out and enjoy British Columbia. It belongs to all of us. And our goal is to have, first of all, a safe and secure landscape with growing wildlife populations throughout BC. You may not have heard, but the moose population up the Fraser River is in deep trouble. And we cannot be the generation that let this happen. We've got to support our wildlife populations, protect our fish populations, and let British Columbians get out and enjoy British Columbia with appropriate supply of campgrounds, with a proper reservation system, and a way to really celebrate our landscape.